Just so that everyone is aware, we will be recording this session. And yeah, it's nice to meet everybody. Thank you for joining us today. First, we will be introducing YCS and your moderators and the panelists for today's event. These introductions will be brief, and they will give the audience members the chance to learn a little bit about the people running the event. And then we'll go to our panel, where we'll ask our panelists questions and then ask for a certain person to respond. To learn a little bit about sorry. We will then direct the next panelist to respond, and then we will have our open Q&A where anyone in the audience can ask any questions at all that they have for the panelists. Feel free to ask any questions you have during the panel in the chat, but please indicate if they are for a specific panelist or if they're more of a general question. And after we are done with the questions, that are from the chat in the Q&A, you'll have the opportunity to unmute and ask your question. After this, we will have our breakout room session where anyone will be able to meet with our panelists and we will have a group discussion. And then finally, we'll have some closing thoughts and remarks where we will hold our giveaway. More details about that later. So first, we will be starting with introductions, and we're going to be talking a little bit about YCS, the moderators, and the panelists for today. So, who are we? Well, YCS, which stands for Youth Community Service, was founded in 1990 as a collaboration between the cities of Palo Alto and East Palo Alto, as well as the Palo Alto Unified and Ravenswood School Districts. We actively work with youth community leaders to engage in a wide range of public service projects throughout the Mid-Peninsula region of the San Francisco Bay Area. You are currently attending an event created by the Civic Engagement and Education Group. The group focused on youth civic engagement and involvement with their local government and politics. We intend to educate as many students as we can on civic engagement and are committed to fostering a strong connection between youth and local government.
Okay, so now the moderators will introduce themselves. Hello, everyone. My name is Alicia Faraz, and I am a junior at Pond Lab School in Mountain View. I'm really passionate about civic engagement and getting youth involved in the communities. I believe that youth have very strong voices, and they just it's all about just kind of finding opportunities to get involved. I joined YCS this year as part of the Civic Engagement and Education Group.
Hi everyone, my name is Curry Mokhtar. I'm a junior at Gunn High School, and I've worked with YCS for about 3 years now on things like social justice, social activism, and civic and education engagement and stuff like that. I hope to increase access to health resources for under-resourced communities, specifically in the HIV field, but in all sorts of fields in the future.
Hello everyone, welcome to the event. My name is Selena and I'm a sophomore at the King's Academy in Sunnyvale. I joined YCS this year in hopes of making a bigger impact in the community, and I'm passionate about serving and teaching others. So now we're gonna let the panelists introduce themselves. Please welcome Ellen Kamei, Stephen Lee, Antonio Lopez, and Vanessa Smith. If the panelists wouldn't mind introducing themselves really quickly, please just briefly share your name, which city or company you work for, and how long you have been working in politics. Ellen Kamei, would you please get us started?
Hi everyone, my name's Ellen Kamei. Right now I'm the mayor for the city of Mountain View. This is my second time with the opportunity to serve as mayor, and I'm really excited to be able to talk about living in my hometown. So my family's been in Mountain View. I'm the third generation of my family, and I have small children now, so I get to raise my family where I'm from. I have been serving since 2018. I got elected, and then in 2022, I got reelected. And what I've really been focusing on and what makes me really excited to be with all of you is during the entire time I've been on the council, I've been serving on the Youth Services Committee, where we get advised directly by our YAC, our Youth Advisory Committee. So it's made up of our youth and our students, and that's been really important to me. I started out on the Santa Clara County Youth Advisory Commission when I was growing up. And it's been really important for me, like having been an intern before and then an intern supervisor, to make sure we're hearing directly from our youth. And I'm really excited because our youth have been able to do a lot of different initiatives, and one of them is our youth mental wellness, and that is going into its 4th year. So I'm really looking forward to talking more with you later.
Stephen, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, I should say. My name is Stephen Lee. I currently live in Palo Alto, but I grew up in West San Jose, District 1 of San Jose. I'm currently a tech lawyer. I've worked at places like Meta, PlayStation, and startups. I've served in appointed city and local commissions pretty much since I've been 18. I started out as a member of the Youth Advisory Council down in San Jose District 1, helping build West San Jose's first teen center. And local government has just been my way of giving back to my community and a way of making this world a better place. It's always been just a very accessible way for a young person to give back. Currently, I serve on the board of 6 different local nonprofits in Palo Alto, including YCS and the Palo Alto Project Safety Net. So I really am a strong proponent of youth leadership and youth empowerment. And I look forward to having this discussion with all of you.
Thank you. Antonio still hasn't joined us yet, so Vanessa Smith, would you
He's
please
here.
introduce yourself?
He's here. He's just right
Oh,
now.
okay. You just joined.
It's all good. I want to hear Vanessa speak and all the wonderful people. I'll be quick. Good evening, everybody, or afternoon. It's so sunny. It feels like, this reminds you why people come to this amazing state, right? I really want to thank you all for being here on a Sunday. Like I tell people all the time, like in politics, like showing up's half the battle. Like there have been many a city council meeting, and many of my colleagues can agree. You're like, I don't know, and just show up and hey, you come out of it with all your limbs, I promise you. But my name is Antonio. I had the great honor and privilege of serving on the city council. My term expired last December. I also served as the former mayor. I also ran for the board of supervisors for San Mateo County. And I think one thing about my background, which perhaps is helpful, and I really want to stress with you all, is I did not have visions of being a public servant. I think it was a combination of the pandemic, growing up in East Palo Alto, and I'm sure Vanessa can appreciate it, and just seeing, you want to fight for your community and you want to stick up for it and you feel a responsibility to give back. I've been extremely fortunate, growing up in East Palo Alto, and obviously with the political climate being what it is right now. But really excited, and I really applaud you all as youth being here. And I'm also right now, I should also, I guess, say I have a background in the arts and culture, and I've been very privileged. I just got appointed the Poet Laureate of San Mateo County earlier this week. And I can definitely also talk with you all about, the intersections of poetry and politics. And, to me, it's all about telling our story, saying we're here, we're a part of this amazing community. And, that's why it's so important that you young people have your voice heard. So really looking forward to the conversation. Thank you for your time and for the invitation.
Thank you. And last but not least, Vanessa Smith, please.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Vanessa Smith. I was born in Redwood City, but I was raised between Redwood City and East Palo Alto. I currently work for San Mateo County Board of Supervisors, Lisa Gaucher, and she represents District 4, which encompasses Redwood City, East Palo Alto, parts of Menlo Park, and the unincorporated area of Bellhaven. And I think that I started, my parents are immigrants from Central America, so I think that politics was just in our lives and in our sort of conversations day to day of how that impacted them immigrating to this country. So I was really involved in politics sort of at a young age. I was a part of the government, YMCA government program. I interned for a senator when I was in undergrad. So this has sort of always been a part of the work that I wanted to be involved in. So I'm really thankful and honored to be speaking with you all today.
All right. Thank you for our panelists for that brief introduction. We will now be going into the panel and Q&A. So first up, I want to ask Antonio, I know you went into this a little bit, but I'd like to ask you, what made you decide to go into the political field?
Yeah, and I think Vanessa really alluded to it. I think there's a long term and a short term. The long term is, like she was saying, that we come from a tradition where folks engage. One of the things that I didn't know about my family. My family's in Mexico. And after the revolution in Mexico, they carved up, I promise this will be brief. They carved up territories, so there was communally owned lands called ejidos. Now, it turns out my maternal grandfather was an ejidatario, meaning he was part of the group in his village that managed those communal lands, and he was actually the head of that. And so it's in your blood, you know. I think that part of it is also, again, the circumstances of, you know, in East Palto, you know, you're told you go get an education, you stay out of trouble for your degree, you come back, you're able to live here. Obviously, it's expensive to live here. You know, for me, we grew up 11 of us in a small house in the gardens. My uncle, my aunt, their kids, 11 of us, and so you grew up in that kind of environment. You see the need, and with the pandemic, that's kind of what got me really sparked. My vision was to go into academia, but with the George Floyd protests, with the COVID disaster and the disproportionate impact on our folks, I think that's what really kind of put the fire in my butt, to be honest with you. You know, not to be super poetic. You can't not do something, right? Like you have to get involved in some way. Um, Again, going back to that obligation. So really, when I ran for office, I was 26. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I just felt that I had to do something, right? Like I had to go out there and share my passion and my perspective too, as the next as the next generation of East Palto residents. So I would say that it was really a gut. And one thing I'll really share with you all as, you know, for the youth right here, really go with your gut. You know, if something is telling you to go for something, like you don't have to wait for all the stars to sort of like in Lion King tell you to run, like just do it. And you learn so much, you meet so many amazing people. And so for me, it was really the impetus of the sense of crisis, right? That was going on. I would say I didn't know what was going to come out at the end of it, but I knew that I couldn't sit by the sidelines. So that was kind of my foray into all this, and here we are.
That's really cool. You know, I really like that idea of the obligation where you feel like you're like you have to do this. You're committed to doing this. It's something you must do. You know, I feel that all the time. But, you know, we're not here to hear Kareem speak. We're here to talk about to our panelists. And the next panelist I would like to talk to would be Stephen. Stephen, if you could please share what made you decide to go into the political field. I know you're a lawyer and you're on multiple committees. So what made you want to join those committees and pursue this field?
Yeah, I mean, so I came of age sort of in the post 9/11 world. I was in eighth grade US history class with Mr. Madsen at Miller Middle School down in the Cupertino School District on 9/11. You know, we were learning about the Constitution and US histories and the various values that underpin our Constitution and, you know, the US's historical struggle to live up to those values, but consistently failing to do so, but trying nonetheless to form that more perfect union. And so, you know, as I was getting older, becoming more aware politically, you know, it shocked me to see how America was really treating our American Muslim neighbors in the wake of 9/11. And it was just one of those cases where it just didn't make sense to me. And you know, right from the beginning, I saw how fear and misinfo and prejudice and bias can shape not only our policy, but how we treat each other, and how we can kind of treat each other as less than human. So for me, you know, right from the beginning, politics and government was always sort of my way of bringing about the change that I wanted to see. Um, so, you know, in my day job, I'm a lawyer, and so I get to bring my skills as a lawyer, really asking tough questions, and you know, really pointing out things that don't add up. Right? If you ever hear adults or others make an argument, you're just like, that makes no sense, both from the perspective of values, and it's just not backed by facts. You know, being a lawyer really gives you those skills and that confidence to call out things, call out that bullshit, I guess, if I can say that. So that's what I do in my day job. But you know, when I was coming up as a younger person, I was always looking for ways to get engaged and change policy. And local government was the accessible way for me to do so. So as I mentioned, I started doing that by building the first teen center in West San Jose, and through college and law school, and afterwards, I always found it easy just to all of these local cities, these city councils are always looking for community volunteers to apply and be appointed to their local commissions to advise them on different issues, whether it's planning and zoning. I served a lot on human relations commissions and social service commissions, which help these cities determine, like, help them call out injustice and make sure that underserved minority communities are treated fairly and get the resources that they need. So that's sort of what I do sort of in my free time, but it's all sort of part of a larger trend of just calling out injustice and using your skills and your education to kind of question the status quo and question things when things just don't make sense. So that's how I got into local government.
That's really cool. I think that's kind of similar to what Antonio was talking about, where it's
Yeah.
like your obligation, where you want to call out the injustice, and he feels like obliged to do it. And so before we
Well,
go on
and
to the
on that
next,
topic, like one of the things I did in high school was speech and debate, and I had an amazing speech and debate coach. And when we got sworn into the speech and debate league, one of the things that we had to take in that oath was to use the power of speech to speak up for others, for whom others will not. And so again, it's sort of that obligation to give back. If you have privilege, if you have a power, you have a platform to call out injustice or to serve other people. Yeah, so that really had a profound impact on me.
yeah, that's really cool. I
Yeah.
mean, me personally, I've never really liked speech and debate, for reasons I'd rather not share on here. But yeah, that's actually really cool to hear. Before we go on to the next person, though, which would be Ellen. Ellen, can you please tell me how to say your last name? I don't want to butcher it.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Kamei.
Kamei. Okay.
But you can just call
Um,
me Ellen. Yeah, it's cool.
Uh, Ellen
Okay.
Kamei it is. Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
So if you would please mind sharing a little bit about it.
Yeah, sure. No problem. And I think, it's really interesting to hear what your perspective is and what everyone's perspective on the Zoom is. I think for whenever you're speaking to other people and especially youth, I always like to say, like, I learn so much more from hearing directly from youth than, anyone else. So, when it came to deciding to get into politics, I think what's really fascinating is that I share with people Santa Clara County used to be the feminist capital of the world in like the 70s and 80s because of how many women were elected to public office. So it was like a majority on the Board of Supervisors, a majority on the San Jose City Council. So I think, growing up in this area, I saw women leading, and I think fortunately, because I saw women leading, it seemed natural. And I think what was really great about the place that we live is I saw women of color leading. So that was very helpful for me too, in that my mixed race. So my mother is Puerto Rican and Chinese, and my father's Japanese, and he was born in an incarceration camp in Heart Mountain. And so, growing up mixed race, I was also multilingual. And so that background and that perspective and seeing women lead, I think really had me interested when I was in high school. So I saw like in the chat, I think something about like service credit. So when I had to take like my civics and American history classes, I volunteered, and I volunteered on political campaigns. And that's how I got to learn more, and I got to get engaged, and I started learning about how policies can affect communities, but particularly minority and disadvantaged ones. So that is how I first got interested. And my parents were actually pretty civically engaged. My mother is on the city council for the city of San Jose, but she was in elected positions before that. So she was always taking me with her. And I think being able to see that firsthand really inspired me to try to find ways that I could make a difference. I think um, what I think about a lot is who is not speaking out because they can't, and how I might be able to um, like be a conduit for that. I think when I was first interning on Capitol Hill, I thought a lot about, you're the first person that someone might interface with in government ever. And based on their experience that they may have with you, can really shape if they trust their government or not. I think that that's happening a lot right now on the federal level, unfortunately. And I thought about a lot of people are calling because they need help. There's something that's happened to them where they don't understand, and there may be some kind of barrier, and it's our job to fix it. So that is really what got me interested. And from there, I did, student government in high school, did it in college, grad school. And then when I moved back, I joined a commission. So I joined the planning commission before I ran for city council. So that's how I kind of first got involved and how I decided to get into the political field.
So that's really cool. It's so we've had a good amount of like perspective so far. We've had being obligated, feeling obligated to do it. We've had wanting to fight injustices, and we've had being inspired by the feminist groups and wanting to be a bridge to people who can't speak for themselves. That's really cool. And so now I want to ask Vanessa if she could please share what made you decide to go into the political field so we could build this really cool set of like perspectives.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it was sort of shared. I briefly mentioned that my parents fled from their home country in Central America, and I think just having that background of like them experiencing political uprising and unrest, and then coming to the States and having to rebuild their entire lives, I think that that experience is not unique to a lot of people on this call, but it is sort of like an obligation of wanting to get involved, wanting to shape the stories of your parents, of your grandparents, and how their voices are heard through different levels of government. And I think that having sort of been involved in local government groups and organizations in high school and in college, I always saw myself going back to my parents' countries and sort of working in that sort of international space. Um, and not ever thinking that I would come back and be in local politics and work in the county that I was born and raised in. Um, I'm still sort of like grappling with like how life really does change and how you have to just pivot on what you think your life should be and how sort of your community calls you and how your community wants you to show up. So I think like a lot of it is this isn't my work. This isn't for me. This isn't about me. This is like a bigger picture. This is about um, our grandparents, our parents who had to choose a different life and wanting to shape that and see that in the community that you live in.
You know, that's a really powerful point. I'm Middle Eastern, and so I've felt that idea with my family many times. And so thank you for sharing. That was a really, really interesting idea from everybody. I mean, I don't want to single out Vanessa, but that really touched me. As well as what Steven said. So I'm also Muslim. And so when he started talking about the things that happened after 9/11, I really got inspired by the injustices part. And so that's really cool. We will now be moving on to the next question, which will be, what is one field or topic in politics that you're really passionate about and why? We will be starting with Vanessa this time. So if you don't mind sharing, please.
Yeah, of course. Um, I experienced housing instability growing up. So I'm really passionate about the intersection of housing and environmental justice. Specifically with growing up in Redwood City and East Palo Alto, it's very apparent the intentionality of how a city was sort of born and where a city is sandwiched between. In East Palo Alto, you're sandwiched between 101 and 84, and just the carbon emissions and Redwood City being one of the highest in the county or the state for children having asthma. So just being very aware of these very intentional policies that happen to our community and wanting to speak up about them and also create policies that can alter the legislation and also alter the how we engage with these specific issues. Um, and this is a systemic issue, and knowing that this is a long road ahead, but East Palo Alto is an organizing city. There's been a lot of work in environmental justice issues. So it's just continuing that work.
Thank you for sharing. That's actually a really interesting thought. I've never heard those two connected, at least not so intricately like that. So thank you for sharing. I will now go to Ellen. I kind of forgot how to say your name, I'm not gonna lie. But so we're just gonna stick with you, Ellen.
That's
But
cool.
yes,
Yeah.
please share if you can.
Yeah, no problem. So, one topic in politics I'm really passionate about is language access. So, I talked a little bit earlier about being multiracial and multilingual, and one of the things that I learned in having to learn other languages is one, just how difficult English can be, and how a lot of times maybe some of you might identify with having to be translators for your family, whether that's, your grandparents or your parents, cousins, others, and how that can really be a barrier to understanding how government works or, doing basic tasks. So I've really made it my life's work in terms of, when I talked about being a bridge and making government easier, I've been tackling language access. So I'm really proud of what the city of Mountain View has done in terms of we have two different civic language leadership academies. The first is Spanish, and then the second is Mandarin. And our Spanish one started in 2017, and the Mandarin one started going into our third year. And what I tried to do, because this happens in government, is I used the statistics of our community and looked at what the predominant languages were to be able to advocate for the Civic Language Leadership Academies. And what it is it's a free 10-week program that includes meals and childcare, as well as like in language presentation. So when I say in language, it's in Spanish or in Mandarin about everything the city does. So one of the topics might be one week is public safety week. The next is, public works and learning about kind of our sewers and our other systems. And for 10 weeks, they participate in this program and then they graduate. And what's been another really amazing thing is a lot of people who go through our academies then have felt more connected with our city and have applied for one of our boards and commissions. We have over 10 boards and commissions for the city of Mountain View. And so in a way, I feel like it's made the city and what we do more understandable, but also like more accessible because we've done this. And then we also have, when you go to a city council meeting, we have in language translation. So, which also includes like Russian. And right now I'm working on getting like a live AI translator. So when you come to our city council meeting, you can just plug in a language and it'll do live translation. Why we don't have that is beyond me. I mean, we should have had that a while ago, but that's kind of the next thing that I'm facing. But I think it's really important to build that trust. And I'm really passionate about it. Thanks.
No, thank you for responding. Maybe I should move to Mountain View. If you guys add that Arabic one, I will bring my parents. I hate having to translate every single thing to them, but okay. Well, anyways, so that's a very interesting reply. Thank you. Next, I want to go to Antonio, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, sure. And I want to make a brief point about the housing piece because this should be everybody's priority. Like I think the quiet part out loud is that regionally we don't care about it. Like you look at Portola Valley decommissioned its the state did have the housing development RENA number decommissioned it. You didn't build enough housing. You go to a Millen Park City Council meeting, they're going back and forth about save our downtown, right? So, my frustration has been very frankly that, and that's why the youth piece is so important. We really need to understand what our values are as a regional body. And part of the work as leaders is to really help bridge those gaps and share those experiences of having to come back and go to college and can you afford where you live? When y'all graduate and go to school, like where can you live? And so, and that dovetails into my next piece, which is, because the housing crisis is so acute, we can't really talk about anything else. Like if we talk to an East Palo Alto resident, like that becomes 80 to 90% of the conversation, like parks, infrastructure, police, public safety, economic development. Like people are struggling. And one of my, again, biggest pains on the council was how much it dominated the discussion because of the regional crisis. So definitely, like, I think it's important to couch. Not all of us are at the table in equal ways. Like some of us are really like got one toe in, and just are one crisis away from leaving, which really just I always think about. But as that aside, like I'm really passionate about the infrastructure piece. In East Palo Alto, because of the housing priorities we've had and just our budgets, we're a 40-year-old city. We had, I think this is right, about $500 million we need in infrastructure improvements. Probably if you shave off like the really needy stuff, like 200 and 300 million, but our budget's about 65 a year revenue wise. So, but why is that important? When we had the floods in New Year's in 2023, like the whole west side, for all those even Palo Alto, that whole west side got completely inundated. Folks' cars were totaled, and also from an economic standpoint, my family lives in the Gardens. Because of the levee, the way it's built, like FEMA and all those folks, like the insurance companies will still charge you to have flood insurance. Now, if we had protection, sea level rise, there could possibly be an economic benefit for those homeowners. So I think, how do we give people the city they deserve is always a question that comes top of mind. And the state of our storm drains, we're creating that pedestrian overpass on the 101. Vanessa kind of alluded to it with that, historic racism of cutting the community in half. And so creating disconnectivity. When I went to DC, we spoke to the Department of Transportation to get $2 million for that pedestrian overcross. So all that is to say, like, all these issues are interconnected. And I think one of the chief real, like, under the surface crisis is our infrastructure as a community. And I think that if I had $1 billion, right, I'd put a lot of money towards that. And people are like, well, why? We don't need it. And then it's like, when these emergencies happen, like, it makes us more resilient. So yeah, that piece is critical, to have good infrastructure. It's not the sexiest thing people think about, storm drains and all that, and gutters and pipes, right? How old your pipes are, the quality of your water, right? Like, all that stuff costs a lot of money. We don't think about it, but it's super important. Super important.
Yeah, my pipes are horrible. They're brown water like once every month. It sucks. But whatever, we're not going to talk about that right now. Um, that is a very interesting point. So I worked on city council members like election process this year, and they won. I'm not going to say who, doesn't matter. And I there was a really big emphasis on the housing crisis. And I just think that it's super important, and I'm thankful for you and for Vanessa for touching on that aspect. Next, I want to talk to Stephen. If you don't mind sharing a little bit about that. I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I think I agree with a lot of what's been said so far. Like, when I ran for city council back in 2020, housing was a central part of my messaging. For me, housing was inextricably linked to so many of the other issues that we care about as a community, whether it's just addressing, systemic racism and exclusion. I mean, it doesn't take long to realize that, like, just the existence of Palo Alto versus EPA, there's a lot of historical racism and redlining there. And housing is such a big part of, how we create either a more equal and just society, or how we continue to exacerbate, those historical trends. But if you care about public safety, if you care about the environment, if you care about our public schools, it all has a tie to housing. And it's certainly an issue that impacts the millennial and Gen Z generation. I think if you read the papers, it says in order to buy the average home in Santa Clara County, for instance, you have to make something like $400,000-$500,000 a year for many, many years. That's insane. So it's a huge economic problem in addition to everything else. And it's one where, like, with housing, there's just so much, I would say, intergenerational gaslighting here, where young people keep trying to talk about how this is impacting our generation, how it's impacting the entire community in so many different ways. But the folks who have come before us, they don't really want to see what's happening and how their choices, either at the ballot box or in terms of the policies that they've supported, have only furthered that issue and caused it to be, it's just so expensive here, right? And it causes all these other issues. So that's one issue that I care about. But similarly, like, another area where we see this intergenerational gaslighting is on teen mental health, right? Which is a big issue here in Palo Alto. And it's, one of the reasons why I'm on 3 different nonprofit boards, YCS, Project Safety Net, and the Palo Alto PTA Council. Now, I'm not a parent, but I care about teens and their mental health, having grown up in the Cupertino and Fremont Union School District with very high Asian American population, high stress environments. And again, on this issue, we see so much gaslighting. We hear from teens, we hear from the mental health professionals who say that academic stress and other things like that contribute to poor teen mental health. And yet, in the last school board election, we elected 3 school board members who refused to acknowledge that fact, right? So it's this intergenerational gaslighting. It's, we live in this age where people feel entitled to their own version of facts, which is a tough environment to live in. And it's hard to be persuasive and win elections when we have that mindset. And it makes it harder for those, like the folks on this call, to get elected, let alone pass policies, when we're having to kind of pull back a little bit and try to meet people where they're at and educate them on these issues, which are complex and nuanced. You really need to be a student of history on a lot of these things. And, the facts are complicated and nuanced, and the public often doesn't have the time to understand all of that before they go and vote at the ballot box. And again, everyone says that they care about these issues. Everyone, I think, is well-meaning, but there are, in fact, huge differences between people's policies and whether you help or hurt on each of these causes, whether it's the YIMBY versus NIMBY divide, or school board elections in terms of like school board members who will help teen mental health versus those who will make it worse. So those are the 2 things that I care about, but they're very much intertwined, right? Like, we live here in Silicon Valley, we have a huge minority population. So notions of what it means to succeed, what merit is versus, all these different things. It's very intersectional and it's complex, and at times it's frustrating to work on them, but they're important issues, I think, and things that hopefully this group here will continue to work on moving forward.
1,000% on the competition part. I go to Gun, and if any of you here know anything about Gun, that should be pretty self-explanatory. I do like your point about the youth mental health. I think part of the problem is that, like, when you're at the ballot and you're voting, a lot of people, A, don't have kids, B, don't really care about the youth. And so why would I vote for this guy who supports the youth when this guy votes, like, I don't know, he wants to clear out that pathway, make a new restaurant or something like that. And so I think I do agree with your point in many different ways, but we're not gonna spend all this time talking about how much I agree with your point. So yeah, I now want to pass the mic to Alicia for our next question.
Right. So I think we wanted, oh, sorry, this isn't it. So we wanted to ask you guys, what do you think is the most under-discussed challenges in our community? We just heard about a topic that you all are really passionate about, and there were some really amazing answers, by the way. But we wanted to know, like, what do you think are some challenges that may not be like as popular or as like well talked about, that you still think are like really important, that that you think it's really important for us to discuss as a community? So we'll go in a slightly different order this time. Ellen Kamei, if you want to start, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, no, I think it was important to talk about something other than housing, because I feel like that is all that I talk about. So hopefully people know that I still care about housing. But I think who does housing affect the most? Those who are, I think, most disenfranchised in communities of color. So it's important to have that language access. I think the most undiscussed challenges in our community, I think, is gosh, there's so many different ways we could take this question. I'll be really interested to see what the panel thinks. I think one of the challenges right now, I don't know if it's under discussed, is just like the time that things can take. Right now with super like limited resources. So what I'm facing as mayor of a city is what we're seeing on the federal government is affecting the local cities where you live. And we still don't know how much funding is going to be available to make sure that all the critical services that we rely on will be available. And I think that it's difficult because we don't have a lot of information. And every day, every hour, honestly, like every second, things are changing. It feels like in Washington, D.C. And so it isn't, we aren't able to discuss it, I think, that the way that we want. Last week we were meeting about our budget and talking about like the different priorities that we have. And it's difficult to have a conversation when at any moment you feel like the rug can be pulled out from under you. And that is what your cities and communities are facing. It's not just cities, right? It's our nonprofits who are providing critical services, you know, food, housing assistance, et cetera. So I think that we aren't able, like, as much as we would want to prepare, it's almost like you can't because you don't know just what is going to be coming from the federal government. So that's one piece. I would say the other piece that's really difficult too is our state. So the state of California also looks like it's going to be facing a budget deficit. And so we are, I think, communities are needing to prepare for that, and it makes it very difficult, I think, for us to have bring any kind of stability when that is happening. So I think it's people want to discuss it, but we can't because of the limited information, but we're all going to be affected by it. So I think that's like the challenge that I'm, facing most acutely right now.
Yeah, I think that's definitely not something that you see on the surface. I think it's a very like kind of like deep-seated issue. I think lack of transparency is definitely affecting all of us. And I like how you mentioned that it's such a broad issue as well. Like it's not just affecting government, but it's also affecting nonprofits, which have devastating effects for almost everyone in our community. And so it's really interesting to hear about like this problem that is not, I guess, as we'll discuss, as you mentioned, like pretty hidden, but still very, very important. So next, Antonio, if you would be willing to respond.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to. It's very EPA specific, but I do think there's a regional component to this. How do I start this? There's a book called Palo Alto by Malcolm Harris. I don't know if anyone has heard about it, read about it. It's like this big Bible. He's got this like tie-dye, 60s counterculture. It was a cool book. I have my critiques about it. But the reason I mention it, has a it begins in just a trigger warning. It's about suicide, but it begins by talking about the Palo Alto suicides, right? And it talks about this idea of haunting. Haunting, not so much as like a ghost in terms of like something like in a religious sense, but more the idea, like Vanessa was saying, in other words, that the historical crime has taken place, right? So East Palo Alto, because it had to catch up, right? Like it got incorporated in 1983 with white flight, the evisceration of its tax base, Menlo Park annexed the industrial area, Palo Alto annexed the golf course area. We shrunk from 12 to 2.5 square miles in the course of 50 years. Reagan 80s austerity measures. Like it was like the worst time to incorporate, like economically speaking. And so the city found itself very much, and I don't mean to make a history lesson, but just really quickly, the city found itself rapidly having to catch up with the rest of the Silicon Valley. Now, as a result of that, it had to make some pretty big sacrifices. It demolished Ravenswood High School. It demolished the Whiskey Gulch area. And now we're having conversations about the Ravenswood Business District. Now, in each one of those steps, we call ourselves a city on the move, which we are. But one of the things that I've always thought about as a scholar, like taking off my council member hat, is the great sacrifices communities of color have to make to stay here and catch up. And one of the most under-discussed challenges is the trauma and the enormous need for spaces of healing. To acknowledge a great crime. I mean, the Black community in East Palo Alto went from like 60, 70%, like the 60s, to now it's like 10% in East Palo Alto, right? The Latino community is 2/3, and my father's generation in the 80s doubled it. But gentrification is going to go down as well. And so it's kind of like the elephant in the room that there are cities that really sacrifice a lot to be able to stay here. And how much have we sacrificed? Have we taken stock of that? Couple that with like some of the tragedies, whether it's shootings, whether it's mothers. Like I think a lot about like the mothers and the people who grieve privately in EPA, that like because we don't want to be a stereotype, we don't give space for it because we don't want to like trigger ourselves. For those of you who may not know, in the 90s, East Palo Alto was made headlines because of the murder capitals it had. You guys may be too young. I have to remember y'all are so young. But in the 90s, that was a big deal for our city, and I will still, like, I swear to God, I will still go to cocktail parties and galas, and people will tell me to my face, East Palo Alto, I remember when it was so bad. And then they insert like this almost Wile E. Coyote cartoon of like they avoided EPA. Like people would tell me, oh, like growing up in Palo Alto, like if your car stopped, like if you had a flat tire, like you keep driving to like the rims fall off, right? Like it was an enormous like caricature. So what am I saying? I think the most under discussed issue is whether it's East Palo Alto, Bellhaven, other areas. We do talk about housing, but I think what we don't talk about, and I think the RBD, think of it as an example of contamination, right? The RBD has a lot of contamination, right? And it seeps in the soil. And if you don't address the remediation in the soil, it's going to come back in really haunting ways, like disaster. I think on a metaphorical level, if we don't create spaces to acknowledge the enormous harm that has been done on East Palo Alto, from East Palo Alto as well, it's not just outside, it's also ourselves, we're not really going to move forward with everybody included. It's going to be like a haves and have nots of like folks who moved in 5 years ago or a year ago or 10 years ago. And then you have these people who like still remember like Jonathan's Fish and Chips in Little Nairobi Village and like all the places in the 60s or Whiskey Gulch. And they just have these memories and they're like, there was something back here, but we don't know. People don't know. And so I think that's important. Like acknowledge the enormous velocity and pace of Silicon Valley, acknowledge that we unfortunately have a situation of haves and have-nots in the Silicon Valley. And also, in addition to all the important progressive policy that everyone on this call, I think, agrees on, we also, on a fundamental level, have to acknowledge like the deep trauma that a lot of folks have just like growing up here. I mean, I certainly do. I'll just speak for myself. So I know it's kind of a quirky, poetic, scholarly one, but I think that is a very non-sexy, like I told journalists and just like, okay, like that sounds cool, Antonio. Good. So I don't know if that makes any sense to you all, but that's my shtick. That's my argument. Spaces for healing and spaces for acknowledging her.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was a very like detailed, in-depth answer. I think a lot of us, because I think a lot of young people don't actually might not know as much about the history of East Palo Alto. I think so. I think it was like really interesting to hear about that. And yeah, I think so much of politics is like looking towards the future, which is obviously very, very important. That's kind of the reason why we have government, so we can improve for the future. But I think, as you were mentioning, like we can't move forward until we understand the past and its lasting effects. So I think that was such a beautiful message. And I think it's definitely something that we as a community should discuss more often. So Stephen, would you be willing to answer next?
Yeah, first, I just wanted to say I really echo your last point there. Good students of history will see patterns repeating themselves, right? And so that very much is part of my story, right? Like learning about US history in this post 9/11 environment and seeing those same mistakes, same biases being repeated. So it's important that we understand our history so that we can move forward, right? And whenever you're addressing any issue, knowing the full context is important because it's very easy to take a very non-progressive talking point and say, oh, it's just about marriage, it's about XYZ, but often it barely scratches the surface or nuance of what's actually happening. So I really echo that point. For me, the thing that I think is the most under-discussed issue is how do we build a sustainable, progressive local movement, right? If we're talking about housing, if we're talking about teen mental health, how do we build an infrastructure so that we can actually make progress on this issue over many, many years? How do we build a pipeline of community volunteers and activists and folks who can get elected to city councils? Here in Palo Alto, I've worked on 3 different city council campaigns over the years, and there are very few people who have been around in Palo Alto that long. And it's because, we as a group, we're younger, we're more diverse, we're earlier in our careers. And a lot of the people who I worked with early on in those campaigns who cared about housing, who cared about creating a more equitable, inclusive Palo Alto, a lot of them just got priced out Palo Alto. And so they live in other parts of the Bay, they live in other parts of California. Or they just get busy with work, right? Building a family, building, that financial safety net that they need to have a livelihood. Whereas the folks who may oppose us on those efforts tend to be older, whiter, wealthier, more housing secure. And so they have the luxury of time and money and finances to obstruct a lot of the things that we're trying to push forward. So how do we, and for those who are still here, this work is exhausting. It at times can be demoralizing and frustrating. So a lot of people get burnt out and need to take a break. And, I think it's important that people do take a break, right? I think in order to help others, in order to help our community, we definitely need to be taking care of ourselves as well. But, with that in mind, like, again, how do we build, this movement, this local movement of like-minded, progressive, more inclusive stakeholders to do this work on a multi-year basis? Like, it's important that we definitely focus on each project that comes before us, each election that comes before us. But in between that, how do we build ourselves up for success? How do we build that pipeline? How do we build that infrastructure? But even beyond that, like, we live in a world where it's no longer enough to just be right. We have to convince and persuade people who disagree with us and who lack a lot of that context around why we're fighting for what we're fighting. So how do we, again, get organized so that we can get back to basics and help educate and up-level those who disagree with us, or those who are unengaged, or those who wish to obstruct progress? How do we educate them in a way so that by the time we get to an election, by the time we get to voting on a particular policy, that they're maybe closer to where we're going? So for me, that's the most under-discussed issue, is how do we build that movement?
So I think you mentioned, like, I think educating people on policies are super important. I think making sure that voters understand like what's going on is super important to making an equitable environment. I think that's such a good point that you brought up. So I definitely agree with that. I think education is super, super important when it comes to stuff like that. So let's end with Vanessa, sorry. If you would please share your answer to this question.
Yeah, of course. I think the most under-discussed challenge is being honest with ourselves about biases and racist undertones, especially when you're doing this type of work, when you're communicating with others, when you're in these different spaces. And similarly to Ellen, I'm multicultural. My dad is Latino and he's Black, and my mom is Latina and she's not Black. So continuously living at the intersection of two communities while also occupying a space alone. And in that space, I'm able to see how people lean towards working with others that look like them, lean towards wanting to be around people that look like them. And I always try to challenge people and myself to think about considering working and leaning towards people who don't look like you. Because it's easy, right? You see someone who looks like you and it's easy to sort of form a bond. And I think that it's in our differences that we're able to grow and sort of like change deeply rooted biases. And I think this is like speaking a little bit to Antonio. We've been like piggybacking off each other this entire conversation, but he was alluding, the way that I interpreted his last answer was sort of like planting a seed. And I'll take it in a slightly different path, but I sort of see it as like, we need to acknowledge the seed, right? Something was planted, something was done to our community. So acknowledging the seed, acknowledging the trauma, and also being able to say like, okay, we're going to uproot this seed now. Like, this happened, we see it, we are going to make different policies that bring this in our awareness, but also planting a new seed to help our communities grow and our communities heal and move together.
Yeah, definitely. I loved your points about celebrating diversity and differences. Um, I think the Bay Area is like relatively diverse, and so seeing like all these like people like come together, I think it's so amazing because everyone has like a different perspective. I think that makes a more better, like, well-rounded community. And I also really liked your point, like I said with Antonio, like learning from the past so we know how to best move forward in the most efficient and healthy way is also like really important. So I just want to thank you so much. These were all amazing points that were made by our panelists. For our next question, I would like to pass it on to Selena.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you all our panelists for the insightful answers so far. So we're at our last question right now, And so, since this event was designed with increasing youth awareness and inspiring teen political participation in mind, we wanted to just ask, how can youth contribute to politics despite age disparities? So, Stephen, would you please start us off?
Yeah, I think someone said it earlier, half the battle is just showing up. Right? And so, use this time now to be in as many rooms and at as many tables as you can. And I think, for a long time, for me, it took me a while to realize some of these people who were local electeds who I idolized, they're not any smarter than any of us. In fact, when I finally decided to run, I was like, oh, these people are terrible. I can do a much better job. And I kind of wish I had come to that conclusion earlier. So realizing that you are smart, that you have a lot to contribute, and that you don't necessarily have to wait your turn. If you have an opinion or thought on something, or you think that something should be different, stand up, occupy that space, be at the table. And it doesn't matter how long you've been in that community or how long you will be there. I've served on local commissions in each of the towns that I live at, both in high school and college, law school, and now that I'm back. Just get involved and be at the table and make sure that people listen to you. I think that's my number one suggestion. And yes, Ellen's copying the link to the various boards and commissions. I've served on 9 of them since I was 18. So it's a great way to get involved.
Yeah, thank you. Just it's important for like people to just take the first step, definitely, and to use the current knowledge that we have to make a difference to the best extent possible. Thank you. Ellen, could you please share your thoughts next?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So I talked a little bit earlier about the Youth Advisory Commission that we have for the city of Mountain View. So I dropped that into the chat. I think what's really great about that though is like the youth, it's very youth empowered and completely 100% youth directed. So we have in 2020, when we were, I just want to be sensitive that I am gonna mention the word suicide too. So when we were seeing suicides, particularly on Caltrain, the city of Mountain View decided to prioritize youth mental health. But what we realized over the course of a year-long study is we wanted to call it youth wellness. I think part of it is like the stigmas that were addressed by some of the other panelists earlier, because it's not just about suicide. It's about how do we create, a healthier environment for everyone. And that can be youth, their parents, but also like our neighbors and other people who, I think someone else on the panel mentioned, maybe those who don't have families or children or they're grown, don't really know the situation with which everyone is living in day to day that you all are experiencing as a youth. So I also dropped in our youth wellness. And so what we did is we audited kind of like every agency available. So it was like our nonprofits, our different health systems. So we have different hospitals in Mountain View, and we created this like resource guide. So if you click on the second link in particular, you'll see all the different things that we have in the city. So that has been something that was like direct feedback from our youth that we were able to prioritize. And so we just last month in March, we had a Teen Week that's led by our Youth Advisory Committee, and each day they focus on something different. So they did a culminates on a Friday at Red Rock Coffee, if you've ever been to on Castro Street, where they did like a teen night, a teen open mic night, where they did like different performances. It's the highlight. They also bring teen art to City Hall and create all their own exhibits, and they also rate businesses. So in partnership with our Mountain View Chamber of Commerce, they give awards to teen-friendly businesses, and they try to create incentives and programs for businesses to be teen-friendly and teen-forward. So I think it's all about empowering our youth and making sure that they're heard. I think part of the focus is that you all have the power, and it doesn't need to be so like adult driven. I'm sorry. my son. Okay, I get it.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely like joining youth-led efforts is a great way for teens to like solve issues and bring connections. Thank you. Uh, Vanessa, could you please speak next?
Yeah, of course. I think this is a great question. I'm extremely introverted, so I still challenge myself to show up and speak at events. So it's okay if this feels like it's not possible. It's okay if this feels like it's not natural to you, because that's how I feel on a day-to-day basis. I think our panelists called out like the amazing youth commissions and opportunities to show up to, and that's a great way to get involved. And your path to politics doesn't have to look in a specific way. But I'll turn this back to you all. What would get you all out? What would get you to different events? What would get you to want to be involved in these conversations? I think that the youth have cracked the code on educating, on creating content that's engaging to all ages. So how do we carve out that skill and that power into these political spaces? Most of the meetings that I attend are at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. And it's the same folks, it's the same age group. So how do we get, what would make you all want to come out? So that's how I would sort of pose this question. I do not have the answers. You all are the future. You have the answers. And I would want to foster that creativity and that drive to get you all out.
That's a great question you posed for us. I think if there were opportunities to like focus on things teens were interested in, like not really in-depth politics, but also things that just matter in like community building and like accepting diversity and things like that. And if Kareem and Alicia have something they want to share too. Yeah.
Like totally. I think a lot of teens are passionate about specific topics. I know people who are really into education, some people who are really into like addressing climate change. I think any topic you have, you can always kind of benefit your community through local government. I think that's why kind of in part why we hosted this forum, because um, a lot of kids think that they don't really have a say in their community when in reality they do. They can take any topic that they're interested in and then use their interest to help the community, which I think is really amazing.
I think the way I wanted to kind of like frame this is how, so let's say you're a student, right? You're in, I don't know, let's say I'm a sophomore and I want to contribute to the community, but I don't know how to, right? It's like I have this topic I'm passionate about, let's say environmental science, and I can go onto the web right now and Google environmental science groups, Palo Alto, for example. And then, you're not going to get the most amazing of answers. I'm sure you'll get like one or two, maybe even three. And these are just like links to join a group, but they're not really like I felt so I was kind of in this position. I felt kind of lost when I was trying to figure out how I can contribute to the government. And so the way I wanted to like put this back on you is like, how can I find ways to enter this field?
I think my suggestion would be to just reach out to like-minded adults. I think, as I was alluding to earlier, how do we build a movement? I definitely think there's a lot of work, a lot of, help that we need. And so, if a young person were to reach out to me, I'd be like, oh, there's, 100 different ways that we could leverage your passion and your energy and your knowledge to help move, any particular issue forward in our community. So like a lot of times this work is just being done, I guess, in a more informal setting. So just reaching out to adults that you trust and that are doing the same kind of work that you're interested in doing. And I think they will naturally plug you into what it is that they're doing or connect you with folks who are doing that same sort of work.
Normally I would agree, except for the one time I tried to do that, I got completely ghosted. But, I
Oh,
don't blame the
okay.
person who did it. So,
And
um,
that's okay. That's okay. It happens. It happens to everyone. It happens to all of us.
yeah, of course, of course. I'm not gonna sit here and deny that it's a possibility, but it was very frustrating trying to figure out
Mm.
how I can break into it. Okay, so that concludes our panel
Oh,
section.
wait.
Sorry?
Antonio hasn't gone yet.
My bad. That is
Sorry.
my fault. I will take accountability for that.
No, Antonio, so would you please close us off?
Oh, I was hoping I could just like chill in the background and just keep listening and sip my coffee. You know, oh gosh, how do I want to answer this question? Like I said, I ran at 26, which I don't know if that's old or young for y'all, but politically, that's a baby. Like politically, that's an infant, and I definitely felt the imposter syndrome. And keep in mind, I got elected during COVID. So like the first time I sat at the dais was like 3 years into my tenure. And so I had a very unique experience of it being sort of very jaded and jilted. So my circumstance is very unique in that sense. However, I got elected with 4 or 5 teenage friends and cousins of friends that were 15, 16 years old. We knocked on every single door in East Palo Alto. And these kids, didn't know who the vice president was, what a measure was. But that's the beauty of when you're making change, that you yourself have to change. It's something very important you have to remember. Like making a difference isn't this sort of like, here you go. You have to transform in the process. Like you have to be challenged. You have to be pushed, whether it's like Vanessa was saying, like whether it's personality or introverted, or maybe it's like in terms of knowledge, like learning all the freaking acronyms. Like it's designed to be obscure. Like I just sort of joke around. I'm like JPA, CEQA, FTB, DMV, arena. Like we can play all this game. And why is it so damn obscure? Like why is it take 6 hours? Why is it so only people can only speak 2 minutes in a public comment, and I as mayor have the discretion? Because it's not built for youth people. It's not built for minorities. It's not built for anyone who's not benefiting. So we have to be honest about why things are the way they are, not in a sense of despair, but to flip it and say, it's not so much like there's an age disparity, it's a power disparity. And on the flip side, I swear to God, like the beauty about local government, for the most part, it transcends the partisanship. For the most part, like people are still like, I still got some pretty wild prejudice stuff and all that. But people, when they see you all knock on their door, it could be any issue. They are really impressed and really moved. And I think that with everything happening in the world, all the craziness with whether it's ICE or the administration or the freezing of hires, youth are our best hope and are the reason why we fight every day. So not to be all cheesy, but y'all are the future and y'all have the power, Yeah, you may not be able to vote, but you can help people who can, and you can help people get into office who can vote. And not only that, they want to hear you 10 times more than they want to hear me or other folks, And so just know that like it's not a deficit mindset that, oh, like don't think of it as like I can't vote or I'm a minor. Think of it as I got so much miles in the tank and people are excited. Like when I went to the Palo City Council meeting, there must have been some 50 youth talking about the airport. Rest assured, the council listened to them, right? And so you have a lot more power than you think. And I'll end there. You have a lot more power than you think as a young person.
Thank you. I really like how you highlighted how it's not about like the differences and like age gaps. It's about like perspectives and how if we have the right perspective, we can like use our power to do pretty much anything. Yeah. So now I'll pass it to Kareem.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Now that concludes our panel. I apologize for speaking over Antonio earlier, but whatever, it's water under the bridge. And we will now go to our open Q&A. We will have Helena, the YCS, I'm just going to call her the YCS lady. She will be answering or asking any questions that are sent in the chat. And after that, feel free to unmute and ask your question, but please indicate who you're speaking to when you do that.
Does anyone currently have any questions in the chat, Elena?
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Vanessa.
Vanessa.
Thanks so much, Vanessa.
Hey, in that case, do we want to just let people unmute if they have any questions?
Yeah, I just got a question in the chat
Okay.
about how I think, and Antonio just kind of touched on the airport and maybe how like the issues of climate change, how you're seeing that impact your local community and what is being done. The student is interested in getting involved and like what do you see being done and are things that youth can be a part of it. So Antonio mentioned like going to city council meetings, speaking in public comments about current like proposals.
I've said my piece. I don't know if anyone else on the panel wants to chime in.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would add is, in addition to coming to city council meetings, doing public comment, talk to your parents and talk to other adults about climate change and how it impacts, how it intersects with local issues, right? We talked a lot about housing. Housing is a huge way that we at a local level can address climate change, right? If you have folks who are commuting from further away, that creates more carbon dioxide, right? We need to enable folks to live closer to where they work, but that's just not the reality now. And it's interesting, there's a lot of misinfo out there. You often see folks who are against housing, they talk about, oh, it's just going to create more traffic. It's not good for the environment. When in reality, building more housing near the jobs, building denser housing is actually better for the environment than what we have right now. So talking to adults, letting them know that you care about this issue, helping to educate them about how housing policy does impact climate change, very important. So that's one way that you can address climate change locally, I think. But also maybe even just talk about if it causes you anxiety like it does to me, talk to them about that, and maybe it will help motivate both the adults and policymakers in your life to move faster. Oftentimes when I talk about climate change in Palo Alto, people just want to spend so much time on just education. They don't want to actually require or mandate any changes. And so you can kind of see that there's a differences in the generations in terms of how fast or how dramatically we need to move to combat climate change. And I think, for our two generations, climate change is very much existential, and we can't afford to move at the zero pace rate that we have been so far. So, helping to educate them, helping explain why it's important to you, why it's existential to us, I think is very important part of the process.
Ellen, I don't know if you had something you wanted to share.
Yeah, I do. So, I think that there's a lot of different ways to get involved just beyond like attending a council meeting. So for the city of Mountain View, we have an environmental sustainability action plan. And so we adopted one about like 10 years ago and then just recently adopted one. And as part of it, we've created an Office of Sustainability within the city, which now has about 10 full-time staff devoted to how we make a more sustainable but also like equitable community, because a lot of times those who are affected by climate change are communities of color and those who are disadvantaged. So we have different actions. We have a committee for the city, and we have different actions that we're approving. But what I've seen our youth do, and I can only speak for Mountain View, is a lot of the different high schools and middle schools have clubs. So I don't know if any of you are part of like your like high school sustainability club. So sometimes they'll like look and see what we're doing on our council agenda, but they've also, and sometimes people will come and speak and talk to us either at the committee or at the council meeting about how different projects are affecting them. But what's also been really great is how our youth have been interacting with like our nonprofit community. So perhaps some of you have heard of like Canopy. We also like today we had a tour of our pollinator habitat. So one of the things that we've been talking about is needing to have more like pollinator gardens and try to reestablish our bee population. I don't think like when I was a youth, I was really necessarily thinking about bees other than like, I don't want to get stung by them. But our youth have worked on creating more pollinator habitats because that can bring back native species and plants, as well as like our native like butterflies, particularly monarchs, which are now like an endangered species. So I think there's different ways you can get involved, and I've seen it be pretty powerful for our youth to do. And I think that to me, like, has been really great because that's more like hands-on interaction. But I think there was a question earlier too, and I don't know if we had an opportunity on this panel to talk about like mentorship, and how adults can help be vehicles, and anybody on this panel can help be mentors as you're navigating your government and politics. So just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Another question from the participants is, what is a significant setback that you faced and how did you respond to it in your journey into politics?
I think it's just you and me, Stephen. Do you want to go first? I think this is it. It's just
Yeah,
us two.
I mean,
We can
I mean,
answer it together if you want.
I mean, the most obvious one for me was, so I ran for city council in 2020. And I'm obviously not on the city council. And that was something that, I spent so much of my life building up to. I knew it was something that I wanted to do, something that I knew that I could do, and that I could make a positive difference in that way. And so losing an election is quite devastating, especially if you're someone who puts a lot of yourself into the work that you do for the community. And so in the years since, it's been a struggle to find purpose, right? And to find that passion again, and to find different ways to contribute. For me, I took a little bit of a break. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes, a break is good. You want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, so that you can serve other people. So I came back after a small break and I got involved through some of the local nonprofits that I had worked with and funded when I served on commissions. And somehow I ended up on 6 different local nonprofit boards in Palo Alto. And so that's my way to continue giving back. But yeah, that was a huge setback. And I think so much in life, it's not a clear-cut path. And there's so many different ways to give back and make a difference in this world. It's just finding the way that taps into your passion and finding a way that kind of honors you, and finding a group or venue that appreciates and values your contributions and your passion. And I found that through the various things that I'm involved with now.
The question was, can you repeat the question, Helena?
Yes, it was about a significant setback and how you responded.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so many different like significant setbacks, I feel like. And I think one that I'll share just because it's like politics focused is I think that um I also have run and lost. So the first time I ran, I did lose. And I think as Stephen was mentioning, it really, you have to like question, like, do I run again? Or it kind of is this for me? And it's that question of like, pivoting and what you want to do. I think that that's like a whole different thing, is running for office and like the trauma that brings. But I think one of the things I want to share with this group is, significant setback is there's been women, elected women who I've been really excited to meet, or whose work that I've admired. And then I meet them and they are not who you think that they are. And to me, that's been a significant setback because I think all of us were talking about like, you want to get engaged maybe in politics or in government to make a difference, and you're following someone's work and you think they're great. And there can be very few role models out there. And so when you have an opportunity to like meet that individual and it doesn't go how you hoped it would go, I think that can be pretty devastating. And I think for myself, it felt like pretty like isolating. Um, and I think it felt like pretty personal. And it you wonder about, you know, like it's kind of like the Instagram versus reality, right? It's like this is who they are on Instagram, and in reality they're not. And I think just as but that has made me, I think, in my role as mayor, want to make sure that like who I am with all of you on Zoom is who I am every moment and every day. So like I'm sorry that my son like ran in. He's 3 and he was like super upset because he wants to go to the beach. I was like, I want to take everybody wants to go to the beach right now. I just can't take you. Um, but you know, that's who I am. Like that's my real life. And I don't want necessarily everyone to see that, but that's part of who I am, right? And it's being comfortable with that vulnerability, but not a lot of people are. So I think that that's something that's been significant is, you know, I think Stephen talking about running and you know, what do you do next is vulnerable. And I think that makes you like a better leader in the end. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you both so much for that. And then another question came in about what is something that kind of along the same lines. What is something, Ellen, you were speaking to this. What is something that you wish you had known about local government before running?
I think that Antonio talked about this a little bit, and I think everyone's kind of alluded to it, is there's kind of like unspoken rules in government, in local government and politics. And because they're unspoken, you like show up, right? And you think like you know what's going on, but there's so many different things. And that has been quite challenging. And I don't know, Stephen, do you want to like help me elaborate on that? Because I think you know, you've experienced that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's like sometimes you have to be strategic, right? It's this constant struggle between being strategic versus being your authentic self, and but you can do kind of both at the same time. But I think I kind of alluded to it earlier, where sometimes it's just not enough to be right, right? Especially if other people disagree with you. And if you're interested in being elected or in interested in the political scene, you kind of need the support of other people, including those who don't agree with you. So I don't know if I would have necessarily changed my approach, but I think it would have been good for me to realize that sometimes being strategic is important, and you know, having to play that longer game. You know, I worked for a city council candidate this past year, and you know, it was a lot easier for him to get elected because he didn't have a track record that really, you know, alienated anyone. In some ways, you know, he was more of a model minority than I was. And that helped him get elected. Again, I don't know if it would have changed how I did things, but I think understanding that in politics, you do need the support of other people. So trying to pick and choose when you are strategic and when it's important enough to be truly authentic and outspoken to your beliefs, I think is something just to be aware of.
Yeah, I think there's like an element of like pragmatism to
Yeah,
it. And it's you know, if you're in a lot of ways, it's also um sometimes it's like, is it about being right or is it about getting the
right,
vote? About getting
right.
the vote. And so they sometimes talk about like how the sausage gets made and kind of everything that goes along behind it. And so, but it's also like learning how maybe Stephen and I vote together on one thing, and then the next thing we vote opposites.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's not taking it personally, like, oh, Stephen doesn't like me, right? And I think there's like this personal element to it where you have to be able to, you know, go with someone on one thing and then another. And it's kind of maybe like friendships too. Like you're not 100% going to agree with your friends every time. I mean, if you do, that's awesome. But you have to be able to have different points of view
Right.
and still be able to work together. And that's where the pragmatism comes in, because to get anything done, you need at least 4 on a 7-member
Right.
council like me in Mountain View, or 3 in a 5-member council like another city.
Well, and I think it's also interesting to note, like, even if you are pragmatic in that way, and you know, you find alliances there, not all of your colleagues are going to take that approach. Like for me, I was always like, I'm going to work with everyone, if even if we disagree. but some of my colleagues were like, oh, I disagree with you on this, so I'm not going to work with you on anything. And so, I mean, we see this dynamic at the national level too, where it's like we we want to be, the best versions of ourselves and to live up to our highest ideals, but sometimes the other side doesn't play by those ideals or values. And so again, it's one of those things where you have to decide like what is more important in that particular situation. Sometimes you have to be strategic. Sometimes you have to take an approach that maybe you wouldn't prefer to take because that's sort of the reality on the ground.
Wonderful. Thank you for your insights. And this last question that I have so far, so keep sending them in, participants, if you have anything that you would like to hear about, is about, let me find the question, is about like social media activism and people really like posting their political views on social media and how you think that plays a role in our today's society and how like what complements that in the in-person, like what should those people then be doing in person to show up for these causes they care about?
That's a very interesting and challenging question. I mean, I grew up with social media. I was the states mailer, but I was the first high school class that got access to Facebook, and so I've used Facebook my entire life, whether it's in undergrad, law school, post school, to build community, to do local advocacy work and movement building. And it can be tough. Like, you can use social media to find other like-minded people and help get them together to mobilize in the real world. Um, Sometimes it's important just to, like, if you see something that you disagree with that is totally inaccurate, just to sometimes comment so that folks understand that view doesn't represent an entire community, or that what they're saying is not right. um, but again, you kind of have to pick and choose, like, which moments um, do you feel compelled to say something, and are you just trying to rebut what they're saying, or are you trying to be persuasive, or are you, there's a lot of different ways to use social media, and sometimes it's constructive, other times it's not. Like, I've recently disconnected from Nextdoor because I found it just to be a very toxic place, and it wasn't good for my own mental health. But I continue to use Facebook and other social media platforms to try to build community. So it's a tough question, but I definitely think that there's an important role for social media to empower people, because I think the only way we get things done is by doing it together. And so to the extent that you can get folks together on social media, or even just set the record straight on a lot of issues, right? Because sometimes the loudest voices are the ones that are the ones showing up to make decisions.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting question because it's tricky, right?
Yeah.
I think I think that this last election, I know that not everyone can vote, but the 2024 election showed the power of social media, right? Showed like the power of TikTok, show in particular, where people were very vocal. I would say like on both extremes, right? It doesn't necessarily feel balanced, but it wasn't only that, it was also where candidates were going was to these different social media platforms to quote unquote gain followers and gain traction. And so both campaigns had like influencer programs where they were trying to get influencers to like help them get out the vote. And I'd never seen that actually like play out as much as it did in 2024. As well as I would say, I know maybe it's not necessarily like social media, but like podcasts, right? We saw certain candidates go onto different like podcasts or like radio shows. And I think that was like extremely powerful. I will say one of the things that we're starting to learn about statistically is how much people are not reading. So people are going to social media because they don't read anymore, right? You're not really like reading an article, you're not like reading books. It's like, is it in, honestly, not even 60 seconds anymore. It's like 30 seconds or less. And I think that's why social media is such a powerful tool, or I don't even know if tool is the right word, but it's like why social media is so powerful. when it comes to politics. And I think there's an element to it that's like become performative because of that. I will say, like, the thing that I have felt more than I did when I first got elected in 2018 is now I am not doing a newsletter. So I used to do like an email newsletter to like people, and I realized people honestly, it seems, prefer social media. They can like look at it or they can scroll past it, and it's been better because then you don't have to like unsubscribe followers. So that's also like very relational to the times and goes back to like people not necessarily wanting to like read anymore. So I think that I don't ever want to get like lost in the comment section. So I will say that too, right? Because then like the back and forth. But one of the things about putting stuff on public is you can't delete things. So when you're like a public entity, right, people have free speech. And so whatever you post, if there's like a two-way or multi-way conversation, it needs to be up there. Obviously defer to Steven since he's the lawyer of this phone call. But that's the other thing is I think about that, like what I'm posting, it has to be a message for everyone, not just a certain like subset group.
All right, everybody. Thank you for your responses. Those were some wonderful questions that were put into the chat. But now we're going to move on to the breakout rooms. So basically, the way this is going to work is Ellen and Steven are each going to go into their own breakout room. And then feel free to join one or the other. It doesn't really matter. You could switch if one of them's like boring or something. No disrespect to whoever's in my breakout room. But yeah, if you guys don't mind joining the two breakout rooms that we've established, that'd be great.
Have they been open?
I'm just naming them for Ellen and Stephen. I'm
Thank
opening them now,
Thank
and
you.
I'll let you choose your own breakout room.
thank you so much, Elena.
Thank you.
Guys, Helena's the best person here, by the way.